Every story of awakening begins in a dream, and for the empath, that dream begins with sight. They believe they see. They believe their eyes do not lie. They believe the tenderness they glimpse in the narcissist is truth. The fragility they perceive is authenticity. The charisma they witness is love. But what they are seeing is not reality. It is projection. Carl Jung wrote that what we cannot accept within ourselves, we cast outward onto others. The empath does this unconsciously. They project their longing for unconditional love, their hunger to be chosen, their desire to heal onto the figure before them. The narcissist, ever the performer, reflects it back with flawless precision. To the empath, it feels like recognition. In truth, it is only reflection. They see not the narcissist as they are, but the mirror image of their own hidden yearning. They see promises where there are only performances. They see destiny where there is only strategy. They see love where there is only hunger. This is the illusion of seeing. Seeing in this state is seduction. It captivates the senses, overwhelms the heart, and drowns the whispers of intuition. The empath gazes at the narcissist and mistakes resonance for reality. Every word, every gesture, every glance feels charged with meaning, as though the universe itself has conspired to bring two souls together. But beneath this illusion, cracks already exist. The empath overlooks the inconsistencies, the sudden withdrawal of affection, the subtle dismissals, the undercurrent of entitlement. They explain it away with pity, with hope, with the belief that pain must mean depth. They cannot yet admit that what they see is not the truth, but their own longing reflected back at them. Jung might call this the anima and animus projection, the unconscious image of the ideal other cast onto a living person. The empath believes they have met their soulmate, but what they have really met is their own archetype, wearing the narcissist's face, and so the illusion deepens. The empath says, "I see you. I know who you are," but they do not. What they see is a mask. What they know is only their own desire clothed in another's image. This illusion is powerful because it feels sacred. It feels like love at first sight, like fate, like homecoming. And in that sacred glow, the empath silences every doubt, forgives every misstep, explains away every wound. They tell themselves, "I see them clearly. I see their soul." But clarity is not what they possess. They are blinded by sight. For true vision does not begin with the eyes. It begins with knowing, with the inner discernment that sees beyond masks and mirrors, beyond performance and projection. The empath has not reached that stage yet. They are still entranced by the illusion of seeing, still lost in the dream of recognition, still convinced that their gaze reveals truth. And so the story begins here, with an empath who sees everything but knows nothing, with eyes wide open yet blind, with a heart convinced it has found its answer, unaware it is staring only at its own reflection. This is the illusion of seeing a vision that feels holy but hides the seeds of betrayal. The narcissist does not truly see the empath. They see only their own reflection shining back in the empath's eyes. For the empath's gaze is not neutral. It is charged with tenderness, with hope, with a yearning that runs deeper than words. When they look at the narcissist, they do not see flaws, contradictions, or shadows. They see potential. They see the wounded child waiting to be healed. They see the possibility of love that redeems all pain. And to the narcissist, that gaze is intoxicating. Carl Jung wrote that the persona, the mask we wear for the world, is always fragile, always dependent on external validation. For the narcissist, this persona is everything. It hides the shame they cannot face, the emptiness they cannot fill, the shadow they cannot confront. But the mask requires constant reflection. Without others believing in it, it crumbles. Enter the empath. When the narcissist meets the empath's eyes, they see themselves magnified. Every flicker of admiration becomes proof of greatness. Every act of forgiveness becomes confirmation of innocence. Every tear shed on their behalf becomes validation of their worth. The empath's longing projects light into their hollow places, and for a moment the narcissist feels alive. It is not love they crave, it is reflection. They are addicted to the empath's gaze because in it, their false self appears real. Their grandiosity feels justified. Their wounds feel sanctified. Their performance feels authentic. The empath does not realize it, but their eyes are not windows. They are mirrors. And this mirror is not neutral. It does not simply reflect, it amplifies. The empath's longing intensifies the illusion. Their desire for connection polishes the mask until it gleams. Their willingness to overlook flaws erases every crack. The narcissist knows this instinctively. They study the empath's gaze like a performer studies an audience. Every sigh, every smile, every nod becomes feedback shaping the next act of the performance. And the more the empath longs, the more convincing the mask becomes. But this is the tragedy. The empath believes they are seeing truth. The narcissist believes they are seeing themselves, and neither sees the other. The empath's longing blinds them to manipulation. The narcissist's hunger blinds them to love. Both are trapped in a mirror, an endless reflection of need, of projection of hunger, disguised as intimacy. Jung might say this is the archetypal dance of projection, two unconscious psyches, meeting not as whole beings, but as reflections of their unmet needs. The empath projects the healer, the narcissist, the divine child. Together they create a bond that feels profound, but is built on illusion. The mirror holds them both captive. The empath gazes believing I see their soul. The narcissist gazes back believing I am whole because they see me. Neither realizes they are looking only at themselves. And so the relationship deepens, not through knowledge, but through reflection. Not through truth, but through projection. Not through love, but through longing. This is the mirror of longing, a bond that feels eternal, yet reflects only emptiness, a connection that blinds, rather than reveals a gaze that sustains a mask, but never touches the soul. Compassion is a gift, a force that softens the hardest edges of existence. It allows us to see suffering and respond with tenderness instead of cruelty. But when compassion loses balance, when it grows unchecked and unbounded, it does not illuminate. It blinds. For the empath, compassion is not just an emotion. It is identity. They define themselves by their capacity to feel, to forgive, to understand. They believe if I can see the pain beneath the cruelty, if I can hold the wound beneath the mask, I will heal it. It is a noble belief, but it is also dangerous. Carl Jung warned that every archetype carries its shadow. The archetype of the healer is no exception. In its shadow, compassion transforms into denial. The empath convinces themselves that cruelty is only pain misdirected, that betrayal is only fear, that manipulation is only misunderstanding. They do not see what is happening, or rather they see it, but they refuse to know it. This is the blindness of compassion. The narcissist exploits this with precision. They know the empath cannot bear to abandon someone who appears broken. So they weaponize vulnerability, weaving stories of wounds too deep, loneliness too unbearable, despair too crushing. The empath, moved by compassion, ignores their own intuition. They excuse red flags, silence boundaries, rewrite reality to preserve the illusion that love will save. When harsh words cut, compassion whispers, they are hurting. It is not who they truly are. When betrayals surface, compassion insists, they are afraid. If I am patient, they will change. When cycles repeat, compassion pleads, they need me. I cannot give up on them. In this blindness, the empath forgets themselves. They forget that compassion without discernment is not love, it is self-betrayal. They forget that kindness without boundaries is not healing, it is permission. They forget that seeing pain in another does not erase the harm being done. And so compassion becomes captivity. The empath mistakes endurance for virtue, silence for strength, erasure for devotion. They call it loyalty, but it is blindness. They call it healing, but it is enabling. They call it love, but it is denial. The narcissist thrives in this blindness. For as long as compassion shields them from accountability, they never need to change. Every act of forgiveness strengthens their persona. Every sacrifice deepens their control. Every blind gesture of love fuels their hunger. The empath, meanwhile, grows weaker. They feel the dissonance in their body, the exhaustion, the confusion, the quiet despair. But still, compassion whispers louder than truth. And so they stay. Jung might say, this is the empath's refusal to confront their own shadow, their fear of being selfish, their terror of abandonment, their need to be the savior. Compassion, when blinded by these unconscious forces, ceases to be compassion at all. It becomes the veil that hides reality, the chain that binds the blindness that betrays. This is the tragedy. The empath's most beautiful gift has been turned into their most dangerous weakness. Their compassion, unexamined and unbounded, has become the very force that prevents them from seeing truth. Until they learn to pair compassion with clarity, they cannot be free. Until they dare to know what they already sense, they will remain trapped, eyes open, heart full, but blind. Illusions rarely shatter all at once. They fracture. A single line appears hair-thin and almost invisible, yet once it exists, it can never be unseen. For the empath, this crack comes quietly, not in a moment of drama, but in a subtle shift, a tone of voice, a look in the eyes, a betrayal too sharp to ignore. It is small, fleeting, but it lingers, and in that lingering, the first shadow of truth begins to emerge. Perhaps it is the way the narcissist's tenderness evaporates after they receive what they want. Perhaps it is the way their stories of suffering change depending on who is listening. Perhaps it is the way their cruelty slips out disguised as a joke and then vanishes behind a mask of innocence. The empath feels it in their body before they admit it in their mind, a tightening in the chest, a churn in the stomach, a whisper in the intuition. Something is not right, but compassion rushes in to silence the whisper. Pity begs them to explain it away. Hope insists the crack is only a trick of the light, and yet the crack remains. Carl Jung wrote that symbols and dreams reveal truths the conscious mind resists. For the empath, the unconscious begins to surface strange dreams of betrayal, fleeting thoughts of doubt, images of masks and mirrors that disturb their peace. Their psyche is trying to tell them, what you see is not what you know. Look closer. Still, the empath hesitates. They fear that acknowledging the crack will shatter the image entirely, and the image is precious to them. It represents not just the narcissist, but their own dream of unconditional love, their hope of finally being enough. To lose it would mean confronting a deeper wound, the truth that they have given everything to an illusion. So they oscillate. One moment they cling to the image, convincing themselves, this is love. This is real. The next they stare at the crack, wondering if the whole structure will collapse. The narcissist, sensing this shift, often acts quickly. They intensify the performance. More tenderness, more promises, more pleas for pity. For a time it works. The empath looks away from the crack, reassured by the familiar glow of illusion. But the psyche cannot be silenced forever. Once a fracture appears, it spreads. The empath begins to notice patterns they once ignored. The way cruelty always follows closeness. The way pity is always demanded at the moment they consider leaving. The way their own needs vanish while the narcissists grow endlessly. The crack widens. It does not yet shatter the image, but it destabilizes it. The empath feels the tension of holding two truths at once, the love they want to believe in and the betrayal they cannot deny. This tension is agony, but it is also awakening, for in the crack lies possibility, the possibility of seeing not only what is projected, but what is real, the possibility of shifting from seeing with blind compassion to knowing with inner clarity, the possibility of breaking free from illusion, though the cost will be grief. The crack is not yet freedom, but it is the first step toward it, because once you glimpse truth, even through the smallest fracture, you can never fully return to blindness. The crack has been made, and though the empath tries to look away, something inside has already begun to change. They no longer trust their eyes. What they see in the narcissist no longer feels solid. The tenderness looks rehearsed. The fragility feels staged. The love once so radiant now flickers like a faulty light. But alongside this disillusionment rises a new faculty and inner perception that does not depend on appearances. The empath begins to know. Carl Jung taught that knowing emerges when we integrate the unconscious, when we stop projecting and start recognizing. This is what begins to unfold. The empath notices patterns, how cruelty always follows intimacy, how affection returns only after withdrawal, how pity is always demanded when boundaries appear. They begin to see not events in isolation, but the cycle as a whole. And once they know the cycle, they cannot unknow it. Knowing is quieter than seeing. It does not shout. It does not dazzle. It whispers steadily, persistently. This is not love. This is control. This is not destiny. This is repetition. At first, the empath resists. They want to return to the glowing image, the intoxicating dream. But knowing does not let them rest. It lives in the body, the tightening of the chest before an outburst, the fatigue after another rescue, the numbness creeping into their laughter. Their very cells begin to testify. You are not safe. You are not free. This is the shift from believing the narcissist's words to trusting their own intuition, from clinging to promises, to observing patterns, from explaining away pain, to naming it for what it is. It is a painful awakening, because knowing strips away illusion. It forces the empath to face that the love they longed for was never truly given, that the devotion they offered was never truly received. It means mourning the dream they built, the story they lived, the image they cherished. And yet within this pain lies clarity. For the first time, the empath begins to separate what belongs to them from what belongs to the narcissist. The shame, the blame, the endless responsibility, they realize these were never theirs to carry. The chaos, the manipulation, the hunger, they see these as reflections of the narcissist's shadow, not proof of their own inadequacy. Jung might say the empath has begun the work of individuation, stepping out of the collective projection, reclaiming the self from the archetype of the savior. They no longer define themselves by what they rescue, but by what they know to be true within. This knowing does not free them instantly. They still feel the pull of old habits, the weight of old vows. They still hear the whisper, if I leave, they will collapse. If I stay, perhaps they will change. But now another voice rises stronger. If I continue, I will collapse. If I stay, I will vanish. This is the turning point. The empath, once blinded by sight, now begins to trust the deeper vision, the inner sight that does not lie, that does not flatter, that does not betray. It is not yet liberation, but it is orientation. The compass has shifted, the direction has changed. The empath is no longer led by what they see in another's eyes, but by what they know in their own soul. And from this knowing, the path to freedom begins to take form. To know is not only to see clearly outward, it is also to see within. And for the empath, the journey inward is the most terrifying of all. For beneath all the pity, the rescuing, the endless sacrifice lies a wound long ignored. It is the wound of the abandoned child, the silenced voice, the unseen soul. The narcissist did not create this wound, they only mirrored it. Carl Jung wrote that the shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. It is the hidden fear, the unspoken shame, the unmet need, and until we face it, we live as its prisoner, replaying old stories in new disguises. For the empath, the shadow whispers, if I am not needed, I am nothing. If I set boundaries, I will be abandoned. If I stop rescuing, I will never be loved. This belief has been the invisible chain binding them to the narcissist's drama. It is why pity felt irresistible, why leaving felt impossible, why forgiveness came so easily. The narcissist did not invent the chain, they only pulled it tight. To confront the shadow, the empath must look directly at this wound. They must see the child within who first learned that love was conditional. The child who was told they were too much, too sensitive, too needy. The child who learned to trade authenticity for acceptance, silence for safety, erasure for belonging. This confrontation is brutal. It brings grief for the years of abandonment, rage at the silence of those who should have loved them, sorrow for the self they betrayed in order to be chosen. It feels like tearing open an old scar only to find the wound still bleeding beneath. But within this grief lies liberation, for the empath begins to realize the narcissist was never their destiny. They were a mirror reflecting back the wound the empath carried all along. This knowing shifts everything. No longer is the empath trapped in the story of rescuer and victim. They begin to see the deeper story that they were drawn to the narcissist, not because of love, but because of their own unfinished work. Because their shadow was calling to be seen. And now, for the first time, they answer that call. They begin to sit with their own pain instead of fleeing it through rescuing others. They begin to comfort their own inner child instead of searching for children to save. They begin to love themselves not as a savior, but as a human, flawed, fragile, worthy. Jung taught that individuation requires the integration of the shadow, not rejecting it, not erasing it, but embracing it as part of the whole self. And so the empath learns to hold their shadow with compassion, to say, "You are not too much. You are not unworthy. You are not loved because you save. You are loved because you exist." This is the true beginning of freedom, because once the shadow is faced, it no longer rules unconsciously. The empath is no longer driven blindly by the need to be needed. They are no longer trapped in cycles of pity and betrayal. They begin instead to act with clarity, with discernment, with sovereignty. Confronting the shadow does not end the journey, but it transforms it. The empath no longer runs from themselves. They turn inward, they face the darkness, and in doing so, they reclaim the light that was always theirs. To see is comforting even when what is seen is illusion, but to truly know can be unbearable. The empath has confronted the shadow. They have seen the wound within, recognized the pattern that bound them, and admitted the truth that the narcissist was never a savior, but a mirror. And yet this clarity does not feel like freedom. It feels like grief. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And this is that pain. The empath grieves not only the narcissist, but the story they told themselves. The story that their love could redeem another. The story that their sacrifice had meaning. The story that this relationship was destiny, not captivity. To release these illusions is to bury a dream. And mourning a dream is no less devastating than mourning a person. The empath feels the ache of wasted years of energy poured into emptiness of hope invested in lies. They feel anger at the betrayal, sorrow for their own blindness, shame for having stayed so long. Their heart becomes heavy with contradictions, love for what never truly existed, rage at what was revealed, despair at what was lost. This is the pain of knowing. Blind compassion once allowed them to endure. Illusion once gave them strength, but now stripped of both, they stand naked in truth. There is no mask to hide behind, no dream to cling to, no false hope to silence the agony. And yet paradoxically, this pain is sacred, for it is the pain of awakening, the pain of illusions dissolving, the pain of being reborn. The empath begins to understand that their suffering is not proof of failure, but the cost of clarity. They could not have known without losing. They could not have awakened without grieving. They could not have reclaimed themselves without first being shattered. Still, the temptation to return to blindness lingers. The narcissist may reach out again, playing the victim, begging for pity, offering crumbs of affection, and for a moment the empath feels the pull, the desire to escape pain by slipping back into the familiar dream. But knowing cannot be undone. The veil has lifted. Even if they try to return, the illusion will no longer hold. Every gesture will look rehearsed. Every plea will feel manipulative. Every promise will ring hollow. The pain of knowing is sharp, but it is irreversible. Jung might call this the dark night of the soul, a descent into despair that precedes transformation. The empath must endure it, must allow themselves to feel the grief, the rage, the shame without running, without numbing, without returning to captivity. And as they sit in this pain, something unexpected stirs. A flicker of strength, a whisper of resilience, a faint realization. If I can survive this truth, I can survive anything. This is the paradox of awakening. The knowledge that destroys is also the knowledge that heals. The empath's heart is broken, yes, but it is broken open. And through the cracks, a new light begins to emerge. The pain of knowing is not the end. It is the threshold. It is the agony that clears the way for wisdom, the grief that makes space for joy, the darkness that precedes dawn. And though the empath does not yet see the sunrise, they know deep within that it is coming. Pain carves space within the soul, and into that space something new begins to grow. The empath has walked through the anguish of disillusionment. They have grieved the dream, mourned the years lost, and confronted the shadow that once ruled them in silence. And now, in the quiet after the storm, a new sense begins to awaken in inner sight. This is not sight of the eyes. It does not depend on gestures, words, or appearances. It is a deeper knowing rooted in intuition, grounded in truth. It sees through masks, past performances beyond pity. It perceives not what another projects, but what truly is. Carl Jung taught that true vision comes not from projection, but from integration, when we reclaim the parts of ourselves we once disowned. The empath, having embraced their shadow, no longer needs to project it outward. And without projection, their vision clears. They see the narcissist not as savior, not as helpless child, not as destiny, but as a human being trapped in their own unacknowledged shadow. This clarity is startling. Where once pity clouded perception, now compassion sharpens it. Where once longing blinded them, now discernment steadies them. Where once they clung to illusions, now they rest in truth. The empath realizes that they no longer need to be deceived. They can listen to words and hear the hidden motives. They can sense manipulation without needing proof. They can feel the difference between genuine vulnerability and performed fragility. This is the awakening of inner sight, the ability to know without needing to justify, to trust intuition as much as reason, to see with the whole self rather than only the eyes. At first it feels fragile, like a new flame flickering in the wind. The old habits still whisper, "Perhaps you are wrong. Perhaps you should give one more chance." But the flame grows steadier with each act of trust. Each time the empath honors their inner knowing, it strengthens. Each time they say no when their body signals danger, it steadies. Each time they choose themselves over pity, it brightens. And with this inner sight comes a profound shift. The empath no longer fears loss, for they realize that what they once clung to was never real. Better the sharp clarity of truth than the soft blindness of illusion. Better the loneliness of integrity than the togetherness of captivity. Jung might say, this is the emergence of the self, the deeper center of the psyche, guiding with wisdom beyond the ego. The empath begins to live from this place. They are no longer swayed by masks or mirrors, because they see with the inner eye. And with this awakening comes peace. Not the fragile peace of denial, but the steady peace of truth. Not the fleeting comfort of illusion, but the enduring strength of clarity.